I was 11 when I first fell in love. It was on a dry, boring afternoon as I was aimlessly making rounds of the house when I saw him. He was sitting on my brother's study table wearing a purple top and a red bottom with stars printed all over it. I picked him up, determined to understand what about him had taught my brother to start minding his own business. When boom, I was transported to another land, the one which began with a black cat reading a map on private drive. The first book of Harry Potter had transported me to the land of wizardry and spells, away from the boring and monotonous muggle life of non-magical people. Now, by the time I was 12 and a three quarters, I had read all four books, and was eagerly waiting for the fifth one to release. But arrival of the fifth book brought with it, much to my surprise, a whole lot of despair. I had a deal with my brother that I was allowed to read the fifth book only after he was done reading it. Now, while my brother read sluggishly, I couldn't wait, so I decided to sneak into his room and read it when he wasn't at home. It took me an entire year to finish reading the book. Almost to a point where I thought mine and Harry's life had almost merged, like they were colliding into each other's. Life, as I knew it, was exciting and adventurous until she came. Now, she was like an overdose of vomit-flavored candy. She looked like a candy, pink and glossy, but tasted like puke. She was round, tiny, and extremely feminine looking. She had a high, squeaky voice, which to any sane person would sound like an annoyingly sweetened melody, like a cassette gone bad and stuck in fast forward, like a chipmunk stuck in an irritating loop. She was a bitch. I wanted to cut her into pieces and feed her to her cats. Dolores Umbridge, and I will never call her professor, was the worst thing that could happen to Hogwarts, Harry, and me. Now, before Umbridge, I was living life in a protected bubble, much as devised for a 13-year-old. So I could not wrap my head around the fact that something or someone so purely evil could live. Her presence in the book disturbed me, especially when she gave Harry detention to write "I will not tell lies" on the back of his hand. Each time the quill dug deeper into his flesh, I felt a piercing pain in my heart. And I prayed each day never to encounter an Umbridge in real life. But prayers are not always answered. I soon met my nightmare, and she had taken the form of my grandmother. Now, my grandmother was a petite woman, gentle and delicate, yet decisive and purposeful. She moved around the house with a sense of grace that came with the various colored experiences of life, mostly from the heart side. She had a sense of wisdom in her very being and a voice that reminded me of her playing the harmonium. She was a melody in motion. My grandmother was the kind my friends were jealous of, like the cool kind, often playing computer games and performing a victory dance after defeating everyone at carry. She was a delight in every sense, especially when she ate hot idlis and gave warm hugs, not necessarily in the same order. My grandmother was all of that and more. Now, that doesn't sound anything like Umbridge, right? So my grandmother visited us annually, mostly during my Dashera vacations. And being a Gujarati, Dashera is a big deal, often carried out by bringing Ambe Ma, a goddess, home. Now, each evening before the puja, one of my parents would go and take an evening shower, post which nobody was allowed to touch them. I won't go into the details of the ceremony, but the entire puja was one elaborate affair. We often had our friends, neighbors, or family people accompany us to be a part of the early rituals. But this particular Navratri was different. It came with the arrival of two things. One, the customary arrival of my grandmother, and second, you know who, or secretly called as periods. Now, when I told my mother, I could see a sense of worry in her eyes. Her eyes were moving like a radar trying to locate my grandmother's position. To her horror, she was there and she was listening. The gentleness in my grandmother's touch was lost. Her eyes seemed hollow and unaffectionate. She grabbed me by my hand and sent me to take a shower. She asked my mother to give me a head bath. Now, post the shower, I was asked to sit in my parents' room because it was the furthest from the puja room on the cold winter floor. My mother was warned. No one is allowed to touch her, not even you. She then looked at me and she said, "You will not touch anything or anyone in the house. You will sit on the floor and stay there for the entire evening. If you want something, call us and we'll come and give it to you. Stay in the room, especially during the time of the puja." As my brain slowly processed each word, a sense of betrayal seeped through. This was my grandmother, my loving little grandmother. But now, she turned into a monster. She turned into Dolores Umbridge. So I sat on the cold winter floor following this new Umbridge orders. Everything seemed to be draining off its color, and everything had become distant, even my mother. I was in pain and the cramps were becoming unbearable. But it wasn't the period pain that was breaking me down. It was this realization that I was different from my brother. Now, before this, gender was an abstract concept. The only understanding of gender I'd had was to do with difference in hair or clothing or appearance. Periods had just almost found a word in my dictionary. I always wanted to ask my mother if my brother got periods too, but somehow had internalized this notion that it was not to be discussed. Something to remain hush about, a taboo. Nobody in school ever discussed the word or used the word period. It was always a code word. Sometimes chums, sometimes Bloody Mary, sometimes I'm down. It is everything but period. Period. Now, I spent the next 3 days as a shadow in my own house. Now, during the day, I was allowed to move around, but only if necessary. By evening, post the ritualistic shower, I too became an untouchable. I was made to feel that everything I would come in contact with would become polluted, as though I had an infectious disease. The plate in which I ate food and the glass in which I drank water were to be kept separately. And if I wanted to use the restroom, everybody was made to part way, like Red Sea parted for Moses. When I had to walk through the passage, I had to be careful that I did not touch anything or anyone. And if I happened to touch something, holy water was to be sprinkled on it 3 times. I realized what Hermione must have felt on being called a mudblood. Somebody whose blood itself was filthy. This time, the quill sank into my flesh, and I bled. Now, Umbridge isolated Harry from everybody. She made him feel like he was wrong, like a curse to the wizarding world, a mistake which had to be rectified. My grandmother made me feel the same way. It felt like I had committed a sin, and that my sin was that I was a girl. For the first time, I wanted my grandmother to leave and never come back. I hated her for treating me this way, and I wanted to scream at her for being so horrible to me. She was turning into the monster I prayed I'd never meet, and the transformation was happening much too quickly for my liking. Now, my parents never treated this way, and this was not my first period. I remember once I'd stained myself in school and I needed a pad, but I was too afraid and young to tell my teachers, so I decided to call home and check with my mother as to what I should do. My father had picked that phone call. Now, when I told him of what had happened, he asked me to calm down, go meet a teacher, and tell her that I needed a pad. He even offered to come and get me. Now, though it wasn't my mother who had received that call, my father's voice comforted me. He understood, and most importantly, he decided to help. He offered a solution. Now, my mother never banished me from participating in the house affairs during those days. And if she, in fact, asked me to rest if I was experiencing a lot of pain. Now, she understood, primarily because she was a woman, but also because she was my mother. But my grandmother, being a woman, treated me this way, and this bothered me. So, on my fourth day, when we were sitting for lunch, my brother asked my grandmother what I'd done, half hoping to get a dig at me before her because she explicitly liked her more. Now, my parents were silent. I guess they did not have much to say. My grandmother realized that she couldn't dodge the question, so she said very softly, "She's down." Now, clearly, my brother's expressions pushed her to further explain, "She has her periods." Now, before my grandmother could say anything else, my brother exploded. "You're treating her this way because she's on her period. Have you all gone mad? What is wrong with all of you?" The last sentence directed at my parents more than her. "Shut your mouth," she said. "You don't know anything about this. Karhu pade." As though her telling this was a valid justification, a self-explanatory proposition. "What do you mean, Karhu pade? Mom, how are you even allowing this? This is it. This is the last time she's going to be treated this way in the house." And he looked at my grandmother and added, "Not even by you." A verdict had been passed. Silent tears rolled down my eyes. In the last 3 days, I'd hated my brother for every treatment that I'd received. I was angry at him for being a boy. And yet there he was, fighting a battle that wasn't his, to give me back what was mine, my dignity. He ensured that I was respected and treated like a human, like an equal. And he wasn't even an adult back then. He must have been 16 or 17, but he made more sense than any adult I'd met in the last 3 days. For the first time, I realized what my father meant when he said, "Stand up for what is wrong, even if it means to stand up against the ones you love the most." Ironically, it was my brother's actions that got my father's words to life. And that inspired me to find my voice, even though it took years before I could find the courage to say it out loud. Now, the day my grandmother left, I went berserk, touching everything in the house. Literally everything, from showpieces to furniture to food. I sang and danced and jumped from one sofa to another, celebrating the happiest day of my life. It was Vijayadashmi, and umbrage had burned in the fire intended to burn Ravan. They burned together. But my feelings for my grandmother remained sour for a really long time. I could not find the courage in me to forgive her. Until one day the following year, when we received a phone call of her passing away. Now, this is the first time I'd encountered death, and I wasn't really sure of what to experience of it. But I was mostly worried for my brother because he was more closer to her. I wasn't sure of what my feelings were because each time I thought of her, I only remember being angry. So when her body was brought home, I was standing on her house first floor, on her house's balcony on the first floor, watching over the grim proceedings. Everybody were crying and hugging the loss of the dearest member of the family. My grandmother was everybody's idol. A perfect wife, a perfect mother, an ideal woman. But not mine. I'd seen a side of her that had scarred me, and that is a side I could never forget. Now, as they took my grandmother's body out of the coffin, I caught a glimpse of her, followed by a loud cry. "Ali!" It was my grandmother calling my name in the same affectionate manner in which she did before she became umbrage-like. Now, at first, I thought it was my imagination. No one else seemed to have noticed anything. Until my sister Kanchi came out running, screaming, Nani's alive! Nani's alive! And then she tugged on my shoulder and said, Go, she's calling you. Go down quickly. I stood speechless. I knew my grandmother had called my name, and I know it wasn't my imagination. But what ran through my mind was, why? Why did she choose to communicate with me, especially at a time like this? Why did she choose to call my name in the same loving manner she did when I was a child? Why me and not my brother? Or anybody else for that matter? I saw something in my grandmother that evening as she lay motionless, her eyes closed, her body frozen in time. I saw the dainty little creature that my grandmother was. She wasn't a monster that I made out of her, and she definitely was an umbrage. She was just another woman, a victim to a set of practices that weren't hers. A woman yet to find her voice. And in that moment that she called out to me, she let me know that now we were both free. Thank you.